Hi everyone and welcome. I'm Mindy Eggen, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to stamp within a stencil. So here is a look at the products that I'm going to be using. I have the stamp set Christmas Begins with Christ. I have the Postage Grid Stencil and Master Layouts 14, which has this postage grid on there. So I'm going to start by die cutting that postage grid out of layering weight white cardstock from Gina K Designs. I'll then take my postage grid and I'm going to place this in my Misti tool. Now I have a grip mat in my Misti, so I can place my cardstock kind of up and away from the edge, and my grip mat is going to hold the cardstock. Then I can place the postage grid stencil over the top, lining up the lines with those perforated edges, and the grip mat will hold that stencil in place as well. Now, one of the key things in being able to stamp over a stencil is by already having it in your stamping tool. So you can use any type of sticky mat or just putting some repositionable tape behind your cardstock to be able to stick it inside of your Misti. So you saw me playing there with the images from the Christmas Begins with Christ stamp set, and I kind of laid out the design. I needed to know where my elements were going to go. And then I started with sea glass right about where the star is going to be. So sea glass is going to be my lightest color. Now I'm taking turquoise sea and I'm going to go around all of the outer edges of this stencil and just kind of blend up to that light color. I don't want to overtake that. I really want the star to kind of be where the lightest color is going to be. So I don't want to overdo that. Now I'm going to come in with blue denim, and this is going to go around the outer edges. Again, just slightly blending in. I really do want to have that transition of color from really light to really dark. The original plan for this card was to just leave everything attached like it is here, but as you can see from the example in the beginning of the video, I did not. I ended up cutting it apart. But in the beginning, I really wanted to have that star being in the lightest area. Now I'm still going to darken up the images even more, or the edges, I should say, by bringing in the navy. Now I can start bringing my images back in. So all of these images I'm using are silhouette stamps, and I started with the star at the top, and then I have my manger, and then I have the images that are going to go inside of there, but they're going to kind of overlap. So I really need to stamp this in steps or in layers. So I'm starting out with the things that either are on their own, like the star, or I'm starting out with the things that are kind of going to be in the background. Now, I did rub my hand over the images to condition it, and then I'm going to ink this up in a Versafine black ink, and I'm going to stamp this down. Now, as you can see, some of these are overlapping the stencil, and that can be really tricky because you might get a little bit of a gap. And for the most part, that is totally fine. I did need to restamp the manger because there was a little bit more gap or white space than I wanted. So I had just closed the door and stamped down again with a little bit more pressure in that area. I'll continue bringing in my images to build in the scene. I started doing one by one because I wasn't sure exactly what was going to be overlapping at this point. Now, with the angel from this side, I didn't want the tail end to be in that end square, so I used a post-it note to mask that off. And now I'm bringing in the wise men. This one, again, is going to overlap where the stencil is. So you just really want to make sure you're kind of giving a little bit more pressure than normal, especially around the area where the stencil is. Then once I'm done stamping, I am going to just remove the stencil, and it's going to reveal my postage grid that I have here, which looks really great. Now I do have some blue staining on that grip mat, and that is totally fine. The blue isn't going to completely come off. I did spray it with some stamp cleaner, but just so you know that that blue ink will stain. For the sentiment, I decided I wanted to have some shine to this. So I am using a Merry Christmas sentiment off of the Holiday Floral Poly Glaze. I just trimmed that sentiment out. I have a piece of the fancy foil in 14 karat, and I trimmed that down to fit my sentiment. I prepped it with a Swiffer cloth to remove any dust or particles that may be on there. And then I placed the foil pretty side up over the top of my greeting, placed it in the carrier sheet, and ran that through my fuse. Then I can do the big peel and reveal, and I have this gorgeous foiled sentiment, which I will use the coordinating die to die cut that out. And full disclosure, this was the second time me foiling it because I did not prep that with a Swiffer cloth and I had some dust on my poly glaze and that didn't foil completely. So full disclosure, that was my second attempt. I'm going to add a little bit of interest to my background, and I am using powder blue cardstock from Gina K Designs. This is 4¼ by 5½, and I'm going to use the snowy background. I absolutely love this background stamp. So again, I'm placing this in my Misti. I lined up that background stamp, and I'm going to ink it up with the powder blue ink. So I'm doing tone on tone. It's going to be very subtle, but just enough interest to the background. And just to be sure I have really good coverage, I'm going to stamp it twice, which is why I placed it in my Misti tool. Now, off screen, I had trimmed out my postage, so it is going to be all cut apart, all the pieces. There were some that I decided not to use. I'm pretty much using all of the ones that have the images on there. And honestly, figuring out the arrangement for this probably took me longer than the rest of the card process. I did put some foam tape behind all of those postage pieces, and now I'm going to start placing them down. And I'm not going to push down real hard on this just yet in case I need to kind of tinker with it and adjust it because I really want the margins to be even on each side. One of the things that I really wanted to do with this postage grid and the way that it's laid out is have some of them overlapping. And wherever it's going to overlap, which is really just that one piece there, I'm not going to have any foam tape behind it because it's going to overlap the postage above it. Now I have my sentiment, and the sentiment I did die cut out a couple more times from plain cardstock to layer it up, but I did need to add a couple thin strips of foam tape to the one end because that's going to be hanging off of the postage area. The rest of it, I added some liquid glue, and that is going to overlap those postage pieces. Then once I adhere the sentiment, I'm going to call it good. And I'm really happy with how this card turned out. I did question it a couple times just because I couldn't figure out a layout for it, but I'm really happy with what I ended up with. And I think it's just a beautiful scene with all of those silhouette images. And you can stamp over a stencil and get great results. I will have all of the supplies linked down below in the video description and over on my blog. I have a few other videos that you can check out featuring some products from Gina K Designs. Thanks so much for stopping by.